Girl Undercover Episode 8. Written by Julia Derrick. After I'd ended my conversation with Ian, I did a Google search on Eve Koch, not expecting much to come up. I was right. Except for some links to her social media accounts, there were no hits on her. This girl was quite active on social media such as Facebook and Twitter, though. Especially on Facebook, where she seemed to be posting a few times a day. Her page was available to the public, so I read some of her many posts and comments. Right as I was about to stop reading, thinking I was wasting my time, my gaze zeroed in on a post Eve had made about homeless people. It contained a cartoon of an alcoholic sitting at a street corner, holding his hand out and asking for money. The cartoon was so big and loud it was hard to miss. Under it, Eve had written, in glaring caps, "Should you give this man money?" Answer, of course not. What you should do is kick him like the dog he is. Only way to teach him how to behave. What the? She couldn't be serious. I read some of the many comments below in which people either called Eve foul names or agreed with her statement. Eve herself had chimed in, all of her comments as nasty as her initial post. Well, I guess she is serious, I thought, my stomach turning a little. I found my phone and called Ian. "Hey you," he answered on the third ring. "Miss me already?" I could tell there must be an annoying smile on his lips. Not exactly. I need you to look something up for me." "What's that?" It turns out Eve is not as sweet and innocent as she seemed to me. According to a post on her Facebook page, Eve detested homeless people. I want to talk to the 2 eyewitnesses and see what they have to say about the assault, if she did something to the homeless person to set him off. If she did, don't you think it would have been noted in the police report? There's no such statement by the witnesses. Maybe they never told the cops. Maybe they came in the middle of Eve and the bum fighting and didn't realize Eve had been the one attacking him, not the other way around. The cops might never have asked them about it. An ID was all that was needed to solve the case. So they might have ended the investigation the moment the witnesses gave a proper ID. Not all cops are thorough. Surely you've encountered sloppy agents at the bureau? I want to make sure we're not jumping to conclusions about this case. Fine. Hold on a sec, and I'll find them for you. I sat in silence as Ian dug up the 2 names for me. Lisa Huang and Pete Hannity. I can give you their contact info as well. Please do. Actually, if you can email me a copy of the entire police report, it would be great. I want to read it. Sure. Anything else? No, that'll do. For now. After I had read the report, I knew exactly how to get in touch with Lisa and Pete, as well as the names of the 2 detectives assigned to the case. I would find a way to talk to the witnesses as soon as possible. If what I suspected was correct, maybe Eve's death wasn't so questionable after all. Certainly had nothing to do with her trying to sue Adler like Ian believed. I really hoped I was correct. I opted to try to connect with the male witness first, a Wall Street trader, thinking it would be easier to get him to talk to me than the female one. All I had to do was go to the bar he was at that night and approach him. I'd discovered his taste for after-work drinks by simply waiting for him when he left the building where he worked. The 3rd night I hung outside his office, I had arranged to have the entire evening free and made sure I looked ready to mingle. I kept my fingers crossed I hadn't done so in vain, and that he would go out after work today as well. I was in luck. He and 3 of his buddies, all of them in their mid-20s, headed to one of the busy bars in downtown Manhattan's Wall Street area. Stocky Pete Hannity was either a true party animal or so traumatized by the bloody murder he'd witnessed that he needed to get himself shit-faced to cope with it. Whatever the reason, I was glad he was going to bars, as it sure made my task easier. When he had gotten a few drinks in him, it shouldn't be too hard to chat him up, get the truth out of him. I waited until they had all disappeared inside the White Horse Tavern, yet another bar for them to visit. I was beginning to wonder if they had a list of bars in the financial district they were determined to go through. They obviously didn't have a favorite hangout. The tavern was jam-packed with party-hungry men and women in corporate clothing, most of them on the younger side. I was on the verge of being drenched in a beer that a loud guy spilled as I passed him, but I jumped aside at the last minute. I was halfway into the large bar before I finally spotted Pete and his buddies standing at the other end of the oval-shaped wooden bar in the middle of the rowdy space, for a moment fearing I had lost them. They were downing beers and shots, laughing and talking, slapping each other's backs and the bar counter every now and then. Pete was seated on a stool at the bar, his buddies surrounding him like a human fortress. It was as though they knew someone wanted to get to him tonight, and wanted to make it as hard as possible. Well, I knew just what to do to make them give me access to Pete. I'd offer to buy them a round of drinks. As eagerly as they were downing their drinks, I couldn't imagine they'd ever refuse such an offer. Trying to flirt with any of them was a bad idea. Maybe the wrong guy would take a liking to me, and then I'd be stuck with him for the rest of the night. By the time I'd gotten all the way around to where the four guys were drinking it up, I was longing for a cold beer myself, despite hating beer. I had gotten so hot and sweaty from pushing and shoving against all the people. I prayed my makeup and hair still looked okay, even if I wasn't planning on using my looks to win these guys over. I wasn't stupid. If I looked all disheveled, they would be less likely to help me out no matter how many drinks I bought them. I hadn't bothered to change my looks since these guys didn't know who I was, and after tonight I would never see them again anyway. I made my way up to the bar counter as close as I could without making it obvious I wanted something. Then I smiled big at one of Pete's friends who stood right next to me, a thick-necked redhead with a crew cut and a face full of freckles. "Hey," I said. "You guys must have had a great day on the market." "Yeah, it was a good one," the freckly dude said, and raised his foaming beer at me. "Probably not as good as mine," I said, and winked. "Which is why I'm going to buy you and your buddies a round of drinks. To celebrate all the dough I made today." "What are you guys drinking?" Freckleface's tiny eyes got big. "You want to buy us a round of drinks?" "Yep. Told ya I wanted to celebrate, and you guys look like you know how to do that." "Okay." The dude turned around and slapped two of his buddies. He jabbed a thumb at me. "The lady here wants to buy us a round of drinks to celebrate her success on the market today. What do you guys want?" It took me some time to get their orders with all the hollering going on and lots of spittle on my face that I pretended not to notice. Finally, I knew what everyone wanted and ordered beers from one of the busy bartenders, even one for me. I'd suck it up, literally speaking. Drinking wine would make me stick out, and I needed to blend in. As soon as we got the beer and had cheered my imaginary success, I zeroed in on Pete, whom I had managed to squeeze myself next to much quicker than I had hoped. Pete had square glasses and pasty white skin, his short brown hair combed sideways the way corporate professionals so often did. He had the kind of look that was easily swallowed up by the masses of professionals crowding the sidewalks at rush hour in Manhattan, especially since he wore the typical light blue button-down shirt and dark slacks thousands of other young men wore every day. There was absolutely nothing distinctive about him. As bland as he was, it was a wonder I had spotted him in this packed bar. Well, here I was. Now I just needed to get him to give me what I wanted. I gave him my best seductive smile and raised my glass, praying he was straight and that I was his type. I needed to use all my weapons to make this happen. "To Wall Street and making money," I said. He clinked his glass dutifully to mine. As I took a closer look at him, I noted that his eyes were not as flat as I had first assumed, but a little glassy. I couldn't tell if that was because he was really upset or just drunk already. Possibly a mixture of both. The one thing that seemed clear, though, was that he wasn't completely relaxed. He kept rubbing his neck with his free hand, as if it wouldn't stop bothering him. After having a sip of my beer, I took another look at him. Yes, he was no way near as happy and carefree as his friends. Something was eating at him. It had to be Eve's murder. Even so, I couldn't just start asking him about it. Not when his and Lisa's identities were still a secret. I had to come up with another way to get him to talk about what had happened that afternoon. What had really happened. I was sure it was more than what he'd stated in the police report. That report had just screamed of lazy police work to me. I was so glad I had bothered to do a Google search on Eve and found her nasty Facebook post. "You're pretty," he said suddenly, and gave me a half-hearted smile. Relieved to get a positive reaction out of him, I broke into a big smile, tilting my head coquettishly. "Thank you. I like redheads. They're feisty and fun." Well, that's me in a nutshell. I'm feisty, all right. "I need feisty," he said, which I didn't doubt as down as he seemed to be. He had a large swig of beer. I had another sip of my own. It tasted like crap, and my stomach turned slightly as I swallowed, but I kept smiling. "And fun," he continued. "Especially today. I just lost $3 million for my company in a bad trade. I hope I still have a job tomorrow." He sighed heavily, and for a moment I feared he might start crying. Oh, so that was why he was so down. "I'm so sorry you lost so much money," I said, making a guilty face. Now I feel terrible bragging about all the money I made. He had another swig of beer and brushed his hand downward as if I were being silly. "Don't worry about it. Some days are good, some bad in this business. That's just the way it goes. If I'm out of a job tomorrow, I can always find another one." "What company do you work for?" I asked. "The Boehner Company." I nodded like I knew exactly what the Boehner Company was when I had no idea. I needed to quickly switch the subject, or he might figure out I was not who I pretended to be. "I work for Goldman," I said. "Really? That's a great company. Well, not that you don't know that already." "Yeah, it sure is." The only reason I knew something about Goldman other than that it was maybe the most prominent investment bank out there was because one of my friends back in LA worked for them. Fortunately, the little I knew about that firm, like how big they were on charities, for example, would serve my purposes perfectly tonight. I leaned closer to Pete. "What's so great about Goldman is not only how well they treat their employees, but their involvement in the community. Did you know they donated several $1 million to help the homeless last year?" Pete lit up a little, finally looking like there was some life in him. "Really?" I knew they were generous, but not that generous. Well, let's hope the money will actually do some good. Why wouldn't it? I know so many companies and organizations that keep pouring money into the homeless problem, but it doesn't seem to make a difference. They're still out there and as crazy as ever. Like loony bin crazy. He grimaced and moved his index finger in circles at his temple. "Yeah, I know. Most of them are either drug addicts or mentally ill. Or both. It's so sad. Someone's got to do something to fix that. Like really fix it." "Definitely. If not, things could get real dicey. I've been attacked by a few bums, but luckily nothing bad happened. Did you hear about that girl who was stabbed to death by a homeless guy in Midtown the other day? It was all over the news a few days ago." "Hear about it?" "Hell, I was there." I had to concentrate not to smile big. This conversation was definitely going in the right direction. I made myself look shocked. "You were there? What's that supposed to mean?" He sat up a little taller. "I was one of the 2 eyewitnesses to the event." "No, you were? It must have been horrible. What happened?" He threw a glance over his shoulder, then leaned closer to me. This will sound bad, but that chick had it coming. I frowned. How did she have it coming? She kicked that guy's cup out of his hand when he asked if she could help him out. I gasped, covering my mouth. No. Yes, Pete said, nodding gravely. Then she yelled at him that he was a big loser and needed to get a job, that it was because of people like him that the country was in debt to China. She kept reaming him out as he crawled around, trying to gather his money. Finally, I guess the dude couldn't take it anymore 'cause he shot up and started to stab her. It all went so fast that I have no idea where he got that knife from. My friend and I were in total shock. Really? Wow. Yeah, it was crazy. I shook my head in disbelief. If I were you, I wouldn't have been in such a hurry to help her either. What a terrible person to do such a thing to a poor bum. That's exactly what we were thinking, so we weren't in a hurry. Pete gazed at me with a deathly serious face now. What she did to him clearly showed what a nasty person she was. Not that she deserved to die for it, maybe, but it was what it was. We called 911 and reported what we'd seen as soon as we calmed down and found our phones. It's her own fault that she died. If she treated that man with the respect any human being deserves, he would never have done anything to her. She really pushed his buttons. I made myself have another sip of my beer. So true. Wow, I can't believe this wasn't reported on the news. That's because my friend and I didn't want it to be known. In the end, we felt sorry for her, so we both decided not to say anything to trash her name. She'd already paid with her life. I'm sure those who knew her realized she had it coming. Right. Good call. Hey, I'm getting another beer. Pete held up his empty glass. Unlike me, he had emptied his glass in only a few minutes. There was a distinct drunken glow on his bland face now. He eyed my not even half-finished one with his glassy, brown eyes. Want another one? No, I'm good, thanks. Actually, I need to visit the ladies' room. If I put my beer here, can you watch it for me? I gave him a warm smile. Sure. I'll make sure no one touches that beer. I'll guard it with my life. I giggled at his dramatic statement that he followed up with a dramatic gesture. Okay, great. Thanks. I'll be right back. I turned around and began pushing myself through the sweaty, drunken throng, having no intention of ever returning to my beer and Pete. Surely, in a few minutes, Pete would have forgotten all about me anyway. He was already laughing it up with another girl who stood close. I noted as I threw a quick glance back at him and his friends from the other end of the big, oval-shaped bar counter. I was beyond excited. So I'd been right then in suspecting Eve had been more responsible for her death than the media had made it seem. It would be nice if I could get a second account of the events just to be completely certain. Just in case Pete was one of those guys who loved to tell outlandish stories in a poor attempt to impress girls, it was possible. He had been pretty drunk after all, and I didn't know him. I briefly considered visiting the homeless guy, but soon discarded that notion. It would be much too complicated and risky visiting the institution where he was kept in wait for his trial. Even if I got a chance to speak to him, I couldn't lend much weight to whatever he had to say. Not if the guy was a druggie and mentally ill. Which left me with only one other choice. Lisa Huang, the girl who had been with Pete during the stabbing. As I walked toward the subway station, glad to be out of the big, crowded bar finally, I thought of how I could get Lisa to talk. It would surely be more complicated than getting Pete to talk. But when, or if, I did, I could count on her story being the most credible. The nature of Pete and her relationship had been unclear from the police report. It had only stated that they knew each other, but not how well. As I'd spoken to Pete himself now, I had gotten the feeling there might be more between them than just friendship, and that he hadn't wanted to admit that. My first thought had been that he acted like they were friends only because he wouldn't mind hooking up with me. Another reason, though a less likely one, Could be that he was in a serious relationship and wanted to keep his affair with Lisa secret to everyone. These days a man could still be married even though he didn't wear a wedding ring. When the train had reached my station on the Upper West Side, I had yet to come up with a foolproof way to approach Lisa. Finally, I decided that I would just take a chance and head over to her apartment and ring her doorbell. I already knew that she lived in a brownstone in the West 80s, so I probably wouldn't have to worry about a doorman. It would only be she and me and whoever else was at her house. Hopefully she was home alone and had no roommates. If she answered her door, I would pretend I was a detective working Eve Cox's murder case, exactly like Ian had pretended to be an FBI agent to get rid of the NYPD in Belinda Jones's high-rise. I could easily claim more information had been found regarding the murder, so the case had been reopened with new detectives working on it, me being one of them. As long as I acted as confidently as Ian had done with Belinda's doorman and the newbie detective, showing her my badge, she'd surely let me in, and I could ask her some questions. Being a woman was definitely to my advantage, I mused, making her more likely to buy my hoax. I just needed to make sure she didn't take a close look at my badge, or she'd instantly see it was an LAPD 1. I rushed home to switch from the low-cut, snug top, and tight skirt I was wearing to conservative slacks, a blouse, and jacket. I also removed all my makeup and put on a brown wig and glasses. I climbed up to the 3rd floor of the walk-up where she lived and rang her doorbell several times. No one came to open. Pacing outside her door, I chewed on my lip. Okay, what do I do now? Just wait until she comes home. I soon decided that I would. It wasn't like I had a better option. I climbed another floor and plopped down on the staircase at an angle that gave me a good view of her apartment door, hoping she hadn't suddenly decided to go out of town or something. As I counted the minutes, I tried to cheer myself with the knowledge that at least no one else seemed to be living in her apartment. There had been only one name on the intercom downstairs: hers. Finally, almost 2 hours later, a small Asian woman came up the stairs and entered the apartment. I assumed that was Lisa. I gave her 10 minutes to do her thing, and then I stood up, walking down to her floor. Taking a deep breath and standing tall, I knocked on her door with as much authority as I could muster. Soon, I could hear her coming into the hallway. Her peephole darkened, telling me she was checking who was outside. Smart girl. Even though she lived in a safe neighborhood, it was after all 9:30 at night. One could never be too careful, what with all the rapes that had taken place on the Upper West Side recently. Slowly, the door opened and we were face to face. She was even smaller than I had first assumed and had a curtain of shiny, black, thick hair that covered half her face. A thin silver ring adorned her nostril, and her skin was so perfect you couldn't see a pore. She brushed the hair aside and peered up at me. I was already prepared and flashed her my badge quickly before she could say anything. "Good evening, Miss Huang," I said in a deep voice to lend it credibility. "My name is Detective Jackson, and I'm with the NYPD. I apologize for bothering you so late, but there have been some developments in the case of Eve Cox's murder, and we need to ask you a few more questions. Detectives Amaro and Ingham, who you met previously, had to respond to another call, which is why I'm here tonight. May I come in?" Sure." Looking somewhat hesitant, Lisa stepped aside while opening the door fully. I walked into a messy, medium-sized living room that had too much furniture. A big, fluffy white cat came up out of nowhere. It rubbed itself against my legs, making me nearly trip. Lisa was soon by my side, scooping up the cat in her arms and apologizing to me. She continued into the living room and sat at the edge of the green couch there, inviting me to take a seat as well. "Thank you," I said, and chose an upholstered armchair with floral fabric. "This shouldn't take too long." I pulled out a notepad and a pen from inside my jacket, placing both in my lap. I smiled at Lisa, who moved around uncomfortably, where she sat perched at the edge of her couch, her hands neatly folded on her thighs. We spoke to your friend Pete earlier today and found out that there were more to Miss Coca's murder, I said, and leaned forward, giving her a stern glance that usually got me what I wanted when I interrogated subjects. Do you know what I'm talking about here? She was instantly on her guard, letting me know I had definitely struck a nerve. No, I don't think I do, she replied. I think you know exactly what I mean, Lisa. You saw Eve kick that man's cup too, didn't you? I could tell that she was pondering how to respond to my question, her slanted eyes darting back and forth in their sockets. Lisa, it's okay, I said in a milder tone now. Nothing will happen to you if you admit that Eve was not such a great person after all. But she screamed nasty things to the homeless man, telling him he was a burden to society. This is what she did, right? Because your friend Pete isn't a liar, is he? She kept glancing down into her lap. No, he is not. So you saw Eve abuse this homeless person as well then? I think so. And because she was so horrible to this man, you both weren't in that much of a hurry to help her when he stabbed her. Lisa looked up and met my gaze. Did Pete tell you that? Yes, he did. He called the station today, telling us he had more to add to what happened in that alley. He wanted to come clean, make sure we knew the whole story. Do you know why Pete might do such a thing? No, I have absolutely no idea. Did Eve Coke kick the cup out of the homeless man's hand? Lisa suddenly stood up. Excuse me, but I really need to go to the bathroom. Do you mind? I did mind. I wanted her to answer all of my questions right away, but there wasn't much I could do since she didn't have to answer any at all if she didn't want to. Telling her no would only make her suspicious and put her on the defensive. I needed her to be as compliant as possible. So I just smiled. Of course not. Take your time. She disappeared out of the living room and into a second hallway. Soon, I heard a door close and lock. She took her sweet time, only returning more than 5 minutes later. I was playing with her friendly fur ball of a cat in the meantime, getting white cat hair all over my dark slacks. Lisa sauntered over to the couch and took a seat again. I'm sorry I took a while, she said, and gave me a close-lipped smile. Where were we? Oh, right, you asked me if that girl kicked the cup out of the homeless man's hands. She did. She definitely did. She huffed. She was such a nasty person. She was no longer looking nervous and insecure, but sat tall and held my gaze steadfastly instead. I instantly suspected that she hadn't really needed to visit the bathroom. She had needed to speak to someone, find out what to say to me. Where else had this sudden confidence come from? I wondered if it had been Pete she'd spoken to. It must have been him. If not, who? Maybe someone from Adler? Wait, where did that come from? She didn't speak to someone from Adler. I laughed inwardly at myself for thinking such crazy thoughts. Ian was really getting to me. No, if she'd spoken to anyone, it had been Pete to make sure she didn't say the wrong thing to the cops. The guy might have been drunk when I left him, but that was hours ago now. He could very well have returned home and easily have answered the phone if Lisa called him, sobered up enough to tell her about some chick he'd spoken to regarding the murder. Well, I would soon know. How do you know Pete? I asked. We've been friends since college. I leaned forward and bored my eyes into her. Friends only. She blinked a couple of times. It's complicated. Bingo. What's so complicated? Is he married and you guys are having an affair? She gazed down into her lap again. Something like that. He's separated, but now he doesn't know what to do any longer. His wife just told him she's pregnant and that changes things for him. So we've decided to take a break. He needs some time to think about what to do. Her defenses were down, so I decided to go for it. Sure, the answer could be but one. Was he the one you just called so that you knew what to say about Eve Coxon's murder? But instead of falling apart and admitting this to me, she just looked confused. No, all I did was use the bathroom. I know it took some time, but that's because I'm having trouble with my stomach. I'm happy to show you my phone and you can see for yourself that I didn't call anyone just now. That would be great. Maybe she wasn't as fragile as I'd had her pegged. She got to her feet and walked over to the deep hallway where her bathroom was. When she returned, she had a black purse in her hands. She stuck her hand into the purse and fished out an iPhone. Punching in a few numbers to unlock it, she handed it to me. "You know how to work an iPhone, right?" she asked. "I do." I clicked open her phone log and scanned through the calls she had made today. No calls had taken place with anyone named Pete, and she hadn't been in touch with anyone at all via text either for the last hour. I handed her back the phone. "I apologize, but I needed to make sure. It's important you tell me exactly what happened from the moment you guys spotted Eve and the homeless man who killed her. Please don't hold anything back the way you did when my two colleagues interrogated you. We need to know the entire truth." Lisa took a seat at the edge of the couch again and cleared her throat. "Pete and I were just on our way back to work after a late lunch at a restaurant a few blocks away when we spotted this blonde girl talking to a bum in an alley. It was only when she kicked the cup out of his hand and started yelling that we stopped and really paid attention to the two of them. He was crawling around on all fours trying to gather his money. She kept yelling at him what a burden on society he was, and that he should get a job or die." Lisa licked her lips. She said all kinds of horrible things to him. We were both shocked, which may have been why we felt so paralyzed when he attacked. It just seemed like he wanted to make her stop talking to him like that. "So you felt like she had it coming?" Lisa shrugged, looking helpless. "Sort of. I know that's wrong, but that's how we felt. We also felt guilty for not doing more to save her, for not trying harder to stop the bum. She treated him horribly, but she didn't deserve to die because of it." I patted Lisa's knee. "Don't feel guilty. According to the medical examiner's report, several of her stab wounds could have instantly killed her. They still don't know when exactly she died. The homeless man was clearly dangerous being armed with that large knife. You did the right thing not to intervene and instead call 911. Yeah, we also tried to stop her from bleeding when he was done with her, but it was impossible. The cuts were so deep." "I know. Don't blame yourself. You did your best." I got to my feet. "I really appreciate that you let me talk to you and told me the truth here tonight. I'm going to get going." "No problem. I'm sorry we didn't tell you guys the entire truth right away." She walked me to the front door in the first hallway. I smiled at her. Better late than never. I opened the door, said goodbye, and let myself out. As I was walking down the stairs and back out onto the street, I pondered the fact that I had been so wrong about assuming she'd contacted someone while in the bathroom. I had been sure she had, and I was rarely wrong. Was I losing my touch? Or maybe it had never been that good in the first place. It wasn't like I had that many years of experience doing police work. Well, I had been right about there being more than just friendship between these two, even if I had a feeling Lisa was more into Pete than he was into her. I shrugged. I supposed it was only natural that your instincts had an off day. I had accomplished what I needed to accomplish, and that was what counted. Clearly Eve Koka's murder had nothing to do with Adler wanting to get rid of her, because she was about to sully their good reputation. I found my phone in my pocket and speed-dialed Ian. It was late, but I didn't care. I couldn't wait to let him know that he'd been way wrong. "I'm in bed," he answered, yawning. "This better be a booty call." "In your dreams." "No, this is a call to let you know that Eve Koch is definitely not the sweet, little innocent girl she appeared to be when I met her. She's someone who hates homeless people with a passion and is abusive too. That's why she ended up killed by one of them. She messed with the wrong homeless guy." There was some rustling at the other end of the line. "Wait a sec, what are you talking about?" I just spoke to the two eyewitnesses, and both of them told me she basically assaulted the poor bum, kicked his money cup out of his hands and called him all kinds of names. She basically had it coming. Really? Really? Unfortunately, it won't be enough to get him off, as his response to her behavior was way out of line, of course, but it still gave him a motive. So you're telling me Pete and Lisa pretty much let Eve die, then Ian asked, sounding incredulous, that they could have saved her if they wanted to? No, I don't think they could, but they certainly didn't seem to feel all that sorry for her, I replied. And after hearing their stories, I can see why. I kept my eyes wide open as I walked along the street and spoke to Ian. Even if my tech stalker hadn't been in touch for a while, I hadn't forgotten that he was still out there. I needed to always be aware of that, especially while walking alone on empty streets at night. It still sounds a little too convenient that this homeless bloke just happened to have a huge stiletto knife in his pocket, Ian pointed out in my ear. Really? I don't think so. The guy lives on the streets. He would be stupid not to have a weapon to defend himself with. I guess you do have a point there. Well, I'll find out more about that when I speak to his lawyer tomorrow. What? How are you going to do that? Ian chuckled. I have my ways. Yeah, I'm beginning to see that. But why bother? Because I want the truth as much as you do, Gabi. The following day, Ian once again lured me over to his apartment, this time so he could play me the recording that contained his conversation with Anita Ross, the crazy bums court-appointed public lawyer. I was against my will dying to hear what they had talked about. He had promised me I'd learn some very interesting information, so now I was sitting on his couch, barefoot and hugging my knees close to my chest, as he was getting ready to let me hear it. Before that could happen, he needed to fix some issue he was having with his computer. You never explained how you managed to convince this woman to have dinner with you in the first place, I said, and twirled a piece of hair around my finger. I chatted her up at a Starbucks, Ian explained while fiddling with a button. It was pretty easy to get her to agree to go out with me. Believe it or not, women tend to like me. I'm thinking it has something to do with my accent. He shot me a quick glance and a grin. The accent does help, but you're also not too unfortunate looking, I admitted begrudgingly. I'm sure a lonely lawyer woman in her mid-40s wouldn't mind having you drooling all over her. What makes you think she's in her mid-40s? I shrugged. Just a wild guess. How old was she? Hard to tell. But I'd guess mid-30s. Oh. Are you going to see her again? He glanced at me over the computer screens, though he was no longer grinning playfully. No, why? Does it matter? Well, you shouldn't lead her on if you're not interested in a relationship. That's effed up. His face went dark. This world going to pieces is even more effed up. I did what I had to do in order to get the information I needed out of her. She'll forget about me soon enough. That is, if she even wanted to see me again. I honestly don't know if she was that into me. The fact that I told her I was a recruiter for Sullivan Cromwell might be why she was so eager to have dinner with me in the first place. That got my attention. You told her you were a law firm recruiter. Yep. I thought it better not to rely solely on my good looks. I bit on a nail as I considered Ian's strategy. It was smart, very smart. If the woman was in her mid-30s, the glory of being a public defender while getting paid peanuts had surely lost its shine by now. As people got older, idealism tended to fade and realism set in. It was no fun to live in New York with little money. A job at a firm like Sullivan Cromwell could be life-changing for her. She'd definitely lower her guard and tell Ian anything he wanted to know in order to impress him with her legal skills. Smart move, I said. Am I ever going to get to hear your amazing conversation? I gazed meaningfully at his hands that were still fiddling with the computer attached to the palm-sized recording device he'd been wearing during dinner with Anita. Just give me a few more seconds and it'll be ready to go. He replaced a cable and pressed a couple of buttons on the keyboard, then moved the mouse around while at the same time staring at one of his screens and adjusting the speakers. There we go. He gazed at me over the computer screen. Ready? Couldn't be any readier. Okay, here goes. I'll fast forward through the boring parts. It's almost 90 minutes long. It's only getting real interesting as we're eating dessert. He pressed a button and female laughter suddenly streamed out of the loudspeakers. "Oh, you're too funny," the woman said as she stopped laughing. "Thank you," Ian's voice said. "I try." I rolled my eyes at Ian, who fast-forwarded again, then switched the recording back on. Ian's voice spoke again. "You could tell me about the current case you're working on." He shot me a glance and nodded, hissing, "The good parts start here." "Well," the woman's voice said, "right now I'm in charge of this very interesting case that was all over the news very recently. You might have heard of it. A homeless man stabbing a woman to death on the street in the middle of the day." "Ah, yes. I did read about that tragic situation. You'll be the attorney to defend the homeless man." "Yes, my boss always gives me the most demanding cases. He knows I can handle it, that I won't cave under the pressure. Though I don't view this case as particularly demanding. It's really quite routine." "Routine? Why do you say that?" "Well, it should be easy to get the bum off with an insanity plea. After all, the poor man is schizophrenic as well as a drug addict. He should never have been discharged from the institution where he was. The only reason that was done was because the city of New York wanted to cut costs. So irresponsible." "I see. Still, who walks around with a big knife on them?" "I think I read that this man did that." There was some commotion, and then a male voice asked how they were doing, the waiter presumably. Ian thanked the man, saying they were fine. "Yes," Anita said. "He did have a big stiletto knife on him. In his mind, that wasn't nearly enough considering all the threats he was facing living on the streets." "I suppose it can't be easy living on the streets." "It isn't. And it's especially challenging if you hear voices and have imaginary people tell you all day long that people are out to hurt you." This man imagined people were out to hurt him? How so exactly? During my first interview with him, he claimed 2 men came up to him and warned him that a tall, blonde, and very thin woman was out to get him, and that he needed to kill her before she killed him. The only way to kill her was if he stabbed her to death with the stiletto knife. He claims they gave him the knife and drove him to the street where she was walking. They let him out of the car and urged him to go after her as soon as he saw her. He attacked her when she came around the corner. "Wow," Ian said, sounding truly amazed. "So all that was just in his head?" "Of course. According to our staff shrink, paranoid hallucinations, such as those, are very common among schizophrenics, especially if they are also high on hallucinogenic drugs, which he was. Forensics found PCP in his blood shortly after the incident." "Makes sense then." "I have to admit that it was curious how he ended up on that particular street. He usually hangs out at the other side of the island, on the west side." "Really?" There was a subtle but distinct change to Ian's voice. "How then did he end up on that street? Is it possible that there is some truth to what he was telling you?" Anita chuckled, and there was the sound of a chair scraping against the floor. "Hardly. Why would 2 strange men come up to him and tell him such a thing?" "Who knows? Maybe they wanted to see Eve Koch dead." "Isn't that a possibility?" "It's a possibility, but given Ed Thompson's history, that's the bum. It's extremely unlikely. He can't give me anyone who saw him talk to these men or saw him leave their car at the other end of Manhattan." "Really? The only thing that supports his story is that he somehow ended up very far away from his usual digs, which is indeed odd. Even so, that can be explained by him jumping on a crosstown bus while high and just imagining he was driven there. To be honest, I'm convinced those men and their words are all in his head, and that's how I'll present the case to the jury. Ed has already agreed to us using an insanity plea. It's by far his best chance to get off, and that's our ultimate goal. You want to do what's best for the client. That's very true. The client's interest is always the most important. Besides, Ed misses being at the institution. He wants to get back there as soon as possible. I'm sure I'll be able to get him what he wants. I do too. You seem to be a great lawyer. Thank you. I always do my best. I'll be sure to mention that to the principals at Sullivan Cromwell. How do you think he got a hold of the knife if those men didn't give it to him? He's probably had it for a long time. Unfortunately, there's no way of knowing since he's not a reliable witness. Right. Ian cut the recording short then and glanced at me from where he sat at his desk behind his two screens. I realized that I had been completely entranced by Anita and his conversation. What do you think he asked? You're right. It was very interesting. What's even more interesting is that the bum never mentioned he was attacked by Eve Cook, the way the two witnesses told you. Why would they tell me that if it's not true? As crazy as this guy is, it's possible he forgot, right? You can obviously not take anything he says seriously. Like that crazy story about the two men telling him to kill skinny, blonde chicks 'cause they're out to get him. Maybe the witnesses told you that because they knew you were looking for a motive for the bum to kill Eve. You told me yourself it's possible Pete embellished his story to please you, and that Lisa sounded insecure about what to tell you at first. Didn't it take her a trip to the bathroom where she stayed for a very long time before she confirmed Pete's story? Yeah, that's true, but she never connected with anyone while being in there, remember? Unfortunately, I didn't feel nearly as confident about these words as I'd sounded when I said them, which was why I had contacted George and asked him to find out more about Lisa. I hadn't been able to stop wondering what had caused her sudden shift in demeanor. Was it possible that she had more than one phone? George had yet to get back to me about that. Ian stood up and smiled at me. What time were you in her apartment? After 9:30? Yeah. Well, I did a background check on Lisa Huang, and there are 2 phones attached to her name, and she used one of them to text Pete around the time you were at her house. So I had been right in suspecting that she had spoken to someone then? On the one hand, I was relieved to find this out, but on the other, it was disturbing that Pete and Lisa seemed to be lying about what had happened between Eve and the bum. Why were they lying? Ian kept smiling at me, which I found extremely annoying. I snapped, what at him? I can almost see the wheels turning in your head, Gabi. You're trying to figure out what's going on with them, making Eve sound like such a horrible person. Why would they do that if it isn't the truth? I'd be happy to enlighten you. I smirked at him. Go ahead and try. You were correct to suspect that Lisa is more enamored with Pete than the other way around. If all her texts to him are anything to go by, this is surely the case. I've read several of them. Seems she'd do anything for him. But what's a lot more interesting, crucial in fact, is that Pete's father is on the board of directors at the New York branch of the Adler Group. Really? So you're telling me that Pete and Lisa were just plants like the bum then? Look, what does it seem like to you? Could still just be a coincidence that his father happens to be involved with Adler. It doesn't mean anything. If you say so. Are you hungry? I'm going to order dinner. Would you like some? I got to my feet, not feeling like eating at all. Thanks, but I'm going to get going. I have a client at 7 in the morning. That was a total lie. But it didn't matter. I needed to be alone and digest all that I had just learned. I was also planning on going back on Eve's Facebook page to see if I could find out some more information about her. Maybe I had missed something. All right. See you tomorrow at 11. We had a session scheduled for then. Sure. Less than an hour later, I was in front of my own computer and on Eve's Facebook page. I didn't see anything else of interest there, but I was able to determine who some of her closest friends seemed to be, and by going to their Facebook pages, I was able to figure out not only that Eve's funeral was tomorrow afternoon, but where it would be held. As soon as I had done that, I went to bed, still thinking about what I would say to them when I approached them, which I would do at some point during the funeral reception that I intended to crash. Maybe talking to them would give me some insight to this situation so full of contradictions.